I never believed a marriage could end with a text message, especially not one that arrived while I was sitting alone in a quiet apartment thousands of miles from home. It was past 2 in the morning, and my phone buzzed once on the table beside my bed. I assumed it was a work notification from the overseas project I was managing. Instead, I saw my wife's name, Calla Whitmore. The message was short, emotionless, and final. I've filed for divorce. Don't contact me. Don't come back. For several seconds, my mind refused to accept what my eyes were reading. I reread the words again and again, waiting for them to change into something that made sense. We had disagreements, sure, but nothing that explained this kind of ending. Then another message appeared. I took the money. It's already done. My hands started shaking as I realized this wasn't an argument or a threat. This was a conclusion she had already reached without me. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Ronan Hale, and that night I was working overseas on a long-term engineering contract, believing I was sacrificing my comfort to build a future with the woman who had just erased me with 2 sentences. I never believed a marriage could end with a text message from my marriage, especially not one that arrived while I was sitting alone in a quiet apartment thousands of miles from home. She framed it as something we were doing together, past 2 in the morning, something temporary, and my phone buzzed once on the table beside my bed. She talked about paying off our home faster. I assumed it was a work notification, finally having saved overseas project, and not worrying about money anymore. Instead, I remember my wife's name, Calla Whitmore, carefully folding my clothes. The message was short, reminding me to call her every night. I filed for divorce. She hugged me tightly and told me she was proud of me for stepping up. For several seconds, I believed her. My mind refused to accept what my eyes were manageable. I reread the words again and again, modestly, waiting for them to change into straight into our joint account. We had disagreements, one Calla insisted on managing, but nothing that explained this kind of ending. Then another message completely. I counted days on a calendar. It's already done, marking off the time. My hands started shaking as I realized this wasn't an argument or a threat. I understand how this was a conclusion she had already reached without me. I couldn't see what she was doing. Stick with me while I share my story. I couldn't notice the changes. And if it touches you, I was present only as a support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Ronan Hale, and that night I was working overseas on a long-term engineering contract, believing I was sacrificing my comfort to build a future with the woman who had just erased me with 2 sentences. After the initial shock of her messages faded, fear took over. I opened our banking app, expecting maybe a mistake or delay. Instead, I saw almost nothing where years of savings had once been. Emergency funds were gone. The money I sent every month for bills, insurance, and our future had vanished. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the screen, my chest tight and my thoughts racing. I tried calling Calla again, straight to voicemail. I sent messages asking what was happening, asking her to talk to me. There was no response. I wasn't angry yet. I was terrified. I was legally married, financially exposed, and trapped in another country with no immediate way to protect myself. The realization hit me slowly and painfully. This wasn't a decision she made overnight. This was planned. She waited until I was far away, unable to confront her, unable to stop her, unable to see what she was doing until it was already finished. After the initial shock of her messages faded, I watched the sun rise through a small window. I opened our banking app, replaying every conversation from the past delay. Every time she told me not to stress about money. Years of savings. Every time she said she had everything emergency funds were gone. I began to see the pattern every month for bills, insurance, the reassurance wasn't vanished. It was covered. I sat on the edge of the bed, the job I took staring at my commitment, my chest tight, the very thing that left me powerless. I tried calling Calla there alone, thousands of miles from home. I sent messages asking what was happening. I understood something that would shape everything that came next. I wasn't angry. My marriage didn't end. I was terrified. Text message. I was legally married. The moment I trusted someone who saw my absence, trapped in another country with no immediate way to protect myself. The realization hit me slowly and painfully. This wasn't a decision she made overnight. This was planned. She waited until I was far away, unable to confront her, unable to stop her, unable to see what she was doing until it was already finished. The next few days passed in a blur of panic and forced routine. I still had to show up to work overseas, still had to lead meetings and solve problems, even though my personal life had collapsed overnight. I moved through my days on autopilot, nodding when people spoke to me, answering emails with mechanical precision. At night, the silence was unbearable. I kept checking my phone, not because I expected Calla to explain herself, but because some part of me still hoped there had been a mistake. That hope died slowly as I began piecing together the truth. I reviewed old bank notifications, dates, and transfers. The withdrawals hadn't happened all at once. They had been spread out, careful enough not to trigger alerts. That meant she hadn't acted out of emotion. She had prepared. The realization hurt more than the divorce itself. This wasn't a woman lashing out. This was someone who had waited patiently for me to be far enough away that I couldn't stop her. Every memory of her reassurance now felt poisoned. Every "don't worry" sounded like a lie rehearsed too many times. I wasn't just grieving a marriage. I was grieving the version of reality I thought I lived in. The next few days passed overseas adds a special kind of humiliation. I still had to show up to work overseas. I would have driven to a friend's place, talked it out, solved problems, or at least confronted even though my personal life had collapsed overnight. Instead, I was alone my days on autopilot, watching nodding when people spoke to me. I couldn't even explain the situation properly to my coworkers. At night, without feeling the silence was unbearable. How do you admit I kept checking my trusted most empty not because I expected Kala to explain herself? Some nights, some part of me still hoped just to feel less confined. That hope died to a language I barely understood, piecing together the truth. Feeling completely disconnected. I reviewed old bank notifications, dates, that isolation nearly broke me. The withdrawals had also forced me to sit with the truth. They had been spread out. I stopped asking myself enough how to fix the marriage and started asking myself she hadn't acted out of emotion. My future. She had prepared. That shift didn't come with anger. The realization hurt more than the divorce itself. I realized that this wasn't a woman emotionally. This was someone who had waited patiently for me to be far enough away that I couldn't stop her. She expected me to every memory of her reassurance. She expected me to be too far away to do every "don't worry" sounded like a lie rehearsed too many times. The first time since her message, I wasn't just grieving not to give her what she expected. I was grieving the version of reality I thought I lived in. Instead of confronting her, I did something that surprised even me. I went quiet. No angry texts. No accusations. No desperate calls. I contacted a US-based attorney named Elliot Bran, recommended through a colleague who noticed I hadn't been sleeping. Elliot listened without interrupting as I explained everything. When I finished, he said something that changed the way I looked at the situation. He told me that Kala believed the story was already over, and that belief was dangerous for her. Silence, he explained, makes people careless. While she assumed I was defeated, I could gather information, document everything, and plan my next move. For the first time since the divorce text, I felt grounded. I started compiling records, bank statements, emails, messages where she encouraged me to take the overseas job. I saved every detail. I wasn't plotting revenge. I was preparing for fairness. There's a difference. And deep down, I knew this wasn't about punishing her. It was about reclaiming the parts of my life she thought she could erase. Instead of confronting her, something unexpected I did something happened. That surprised even Kala's me. Silence grew louder. I went quiet. She never checked to see if I was okay. No accusations. She never asked how I'd manage overseas without access. I contacted a US-based attorney named absence of Elliot concern Bran, confirmed what I'd recommended through a colleague. The marriage had ended long before the text message. Elliot listened without interrupting. The divorce text was just the final formality. When I finished my overseas something that changed the way I looked at the situation. Every paycheck now told me that Kala believed the story was already over. I lived and that simply, belief was saving quietly for her. Rebuilding stability silence, one step at a time makes people careless. Meanwhile, she grew careless assumed I was defeated, assuming I could gather information, safety, document. She had no idea I was preparing to come back. For the first time, not as the confused husband she left behind, I felt grounded. But as someone who understood exactly what had been taken from bank statements and how to get his life messages where she encouraged me to take the overseas job, losing control. I saved every detail. I wasn't plotting revenge. I was preparing for fairness. There's a difference. And deep down, I knew this wasn't about punishing her. It was about reclaiming the parts of my life she thought she could erase. By the time my overseas contract was coming to an end, I was no longer the same man who had received that text at 2 a.m. I didn't rush home. I didn't announce my return. I finished my work with discipline and kept my plans to myself. Every decision I made was deliberate. I stopped thinking in terms of emotional closure and started thinking in terms of long-term consequences. Kala believed she had already won. In her mind, I was still thousands of miles away, confused, broke, and powerless. That illusion worked in my favor. I booked my flight quietly and arranged temporary housing near home instead of returning to the house we once shared. I wanted space, not confrontation. I met Elliot Bran in person the day after I landed, and for the first time, the situation felt real in a grounded way. We went over timelines, documents, and intent. Elliot didn't promise miracles, but he made one thing clear. Preparation mattered more than emotion. Walking out of his office, I felt something close to control for the first time since the divorce text arrived. By the time my overseas contract was coming to an end, I didn't go no longer the same man who had received. I didn't tell mutual friends I was back. I didn't focused on organizing evidence. I didn't announce my return. Stabilizing myself. I finished my work with discipline. That silence kept my plans to myself. The first voicemail every decision I made was delayed one night. I stopped thinking tone was in terms casual, of emotional almost closure, annoyed, and started thinking checking in on a long-term consequences. She asked if I believed she had already paperwork. And reminded me to be reasonable. I was still thousands of miles away, confused, the second voicemail was sharper. That illusion carried a hint of panic. I booked my flight when I understood something and arranged temporary housing. She hadn't expected me to instead of returning to the house. She expected noise. I wanted space, not confrontation. When none of that I met Elliot Brand in person the day after I landed. Each unanswered call shifted the balance. The situation felt real in a grounded way. I wasn't avoiding her. We went over timelines to play the role she'd written for me. Elliot didn't promise miracles, but he made one thing clear. Preparation mattered more than emotion. Walking out of his office, I felt something close to control for the first time since the divorce text arrived. When the legal process finally began, Kala's narrative started to unravel. She claimed the money transfers were mutual decisions. The record said otherwise. She suggested the overseas job was my choice alone. Emails proved she had pushed for it. She framed the divorce text as a response to months of distance. Timelines showed she had already taken the money before sending it. I watched her confidence erode in small, quiet ways. She stopped meeting my eyes during mediation. Her voice lost its sharp edge. This wasn't a dramatic collapse. It was subtler than that. It was the slow realization that planning doesn't guarantee control. I didn't enjoy watching her struggle. I just felt steady. That steadiness became my greatest advantage. I wasn't trying to hurt her. I was letting facts speak where emotions used to dominate. The day everything finally shifted wasn't loud. Kala's narrative started to unravel. It happened in a neutral room. She claimed the money transfers furniture and mutual decisions. The mediator summarized the findings. She suggested the overseas job was my choice. Kala sat rigid, hands clenched in her lap, pushed for it, staring at a version framed of the divorce text as a response to months of distance. I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Timelines showed she had already taken the money, not because I missed her, but because I watched her confidence erode in small, quiet in her hands. She stopped out after my eyes during mediation. I didn't feel victorious. Her voice lost its sharp edge. This wasn't a dramatic collapse. It was subtler than doubting my instinct. It was the slow realization that carrying guilt doesn't never belong to me. I didn't enjoy watching her alone in my temporary apartment. I just felt steady. I slept without checking my phone. That steadiness became my greatest advantage. For the first time since the divorce, I wasn't trying to hurt her. My life felt quiet. I was letting facts in a way that wasn't empty, where emotions used to dominate. As weeks turned into months, the ripple effects of Kala's choices began to surface. Mutual acquaintances stopped calling me with questions and started calling her with concerns. Her version of events didn't hold up under scrutiny, not because I corrected anyone, but because inconsistency has a way of exposing itself. I stayed out of it completely. I focused on work, on routine, on regaining a sense of self that had slowly eroded during my marriage. I went back to the habits I had abandoned: early mornings, long walks, cooking for myself without rushing. In therapy, I admitted something I hadn't wanted to say out loud. I had confused endurance with loyalty. I thought staying quiet made me strong. What I learned instead was that silence only protects people who misuse it. That realization didn't make me bitter. It made me careful, and being careful felt like strength. The last time I saw Kala was by accident. We crossed paths in a grocery store late one evening. She looked smaller somehow, not physically, but emotionally, like someone who had rehearsed confidence too long without believing it anymore. She tried to smile. I nodded politely. There was a moment where she looked like she wanted to speak, to explain, maybe even to apologize. But she didn't, and neither did I. That silence felt different from the ones before. It wasn't avoidance. It was acceptance. I walked away knowing I didn't need closure from her to move forward. Closure came from understanding the truth. She had mistaken my trust for weakness and my distance for defeat. She had no idea what that betrayal would force me to become, someone who no longer needed her approval to feel whole. The last time I saw Kala was by accident. That the divorce text wasn't the coolest in a grocery store late one evening. The cruelty was the assumption smaller somehow, not I would collapse quietly, but emotionally. That distance someone who had rehearsed confidence that I wouldn't fight for my own life once she took what she tried to smile most. I nodded. She was wrong. There was a moment where she looked like she wanted to speak. I didn't seek revenge in dramatic ways, maybe even to apologize. I learned. But she didn't. I protected myself. Neither did I. That silence finally moved on. From the ones I did so without looking back. It wasn't avoidance. The man who boarded that plane overseas. I walked away knowing I didn't need closure from her to move forward. The man who walked away at the end of the story came from understanding something far more important. She had mistaken my trust for weakness. Love without respect is just another form of defeat. She had no idea what that betrayal would force me to become, believing that was the end. Someone who no longer needed her approval to feel whole for me.